Picture a world where the most feared criminal organizations do not operate from darkened alleys, but from gleaming skyscrapers. Imagine a financial system where mob bosses sit across the boardroom table from CEOs, politicians, and bankers, not to make threats, but to close deals, finance new ventures, and fundamentally shape the national economy. For a huge portion of Japan's modern history, this was not a dystopian fantasy. This was the everyday reality of the Yakuza. Popular culture paints them as honorable outlaws, covered in intricate tattoos and missing the odd pinky finger, a cinematic caricature of gamblers and enforcers. But beneath this veneer of movie-style gangsterism lies a far more complex and revealing truth. The Yakuza were not merely criminals. They were savvy economic pioneers, constructing vast, corporate-style empires that completely erased the line between black market intimidation and sophisticated boardroom strategy. Their story is not just a fascinating chapter in Japanese history. It is a chilling cautionary tale. It is a warning about what happens when the worlds of crime, finance, and politics become so deeply entangled that you can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. The origins of the Yakuza can be traced back for centuries, to rogue groups of gamblers and street peddlers in the 17th century. These individuals thrived on the fringes of Japan's rigid feudal society, offering protection, informal loans, and a powerful sense of brotherhood to the outcasts and misfits of the era. They were the original disruptors, you could say, just with slightly more aggressive business tactics. But what started as small-time street rackets evolved over generations into a full-blown parallel economy. By the 19th century, these syndicates controlled gambling dens, loan sharking enterprises, and lucrative smuggling routes. They were not just feeding off the economy like parasites. They had become an integral, if unwelcome, part of its machinery. In a society where formal credit was a luxury for the few, the Yakuza provided capital. Where the law was unreliable, they enforced contracts. In their own twisted way, they were the ultimate financial intermediaries. The real turning point, however, arrived in the 20th century. After Japan's devastating defeat in the Second World War, the nation lay in ruins. In the ensuing chaos, black markets flourished as millions of desperate people scrambled for survival. Food, fuel, and foreign goods became hot commodities, traded illegally on a colossal scale. And who was perfectly positioned to control these markets? You guessed it. The Yakuza built fortunes smuggling essentials, lending money, and bringing their own brand of order to the economic pandemonium. As Japan began its miraculous economic recovery, something remarkable occurred. Instead of fading back into the shadows, the Yakuza adapted and went mainstream. They started presenting themselves as legitimate businessmen. Their powerful syndicates, with names like the Yamaguchi-gumi, set up formal offices complete with receptionists, business cards, and corporate hierarchies. They invested their illicit profits into construction companies, real estate agencies, and entertainment ventures. For any corporation that needed results and needed them yesterday, the Yakuza were far more efficient than a team of lawyers. It was not exactly clean, but it was incredibly profitable for everyone involved. By the 1960s and 70s, the Yakuza had woven themselves into the very fabric of Japan's booming post-war economy. They held sway over huge swathes of the entertainment industry, from film studios to nightclubs. They gambled heavily on real estate, riding the country's soaring property bubble to generate extraordinary wealth. And they perfected a practice that Wall Street would be proud of: financial engineering, Yakuza style. They would acquire land, use their unique brand of persuasion to clear out residents or rivals, and then flip the property to developers for an astronomical profit. This cozy relationship between organized crime and legitimate finance was not some hidden conspiracy. It was Japan's worst-kept secret. Politicians quietly used Yakuza connections to raise campaign funds or to intimidate their opponents. Major corporations hired them to break strikes or clear obstacles for new development projects. Even the biggest banks tolerated their presence, sometimes directly financing ventures they knew were linked to the syndicates. The simple reason was that everyone was getting rich. The Yakuza were, in effect, a shadow financial system running in perfect parallel to the official one. But with immense profitability came immense scale. By the 1980s, at the absolute zenith of Japan's economic bubble, the Yakuza were estimated to control assets worth tens of billions of dollars. They maintained offices across the country, published their own magazines, and even gained a strange, semi-official recognition from police, who preferred to monitor them as registered organizations rather than force them completely underground. While American gangsters were being aggressively pursued, the Yakuza were holding press conferences. They had mastered the ultimate lesson of modern capitalism. The most lucrative empires are built not by selling a product, but by controlling the flow of money itself. As Japan's economy surged into the 1980s, the Yakuza found themselves at the epicenter of the largest speculative mania in modern history. Tokyo real estate prices soared to such ludicrous heights that the land beneath the imperial palace was said to be worth more than the entire state of California. Banks were practically throwing money at corporations, fueling a credit-driven boom that seemed unstoppable. For the Yakuza, this was not just an opportunity, it was paradise. They poured their resources into speculation, flipping properties and manipulating stock prices with a potent cocktail of cash and coercion. Their methods were brilliantly simple and devastatingly effective. A Yakuza group would quietly buy up shares in a company, then apply pressure to its executives, forcing them into deals or threatening to expose embarrassing secrets. This practice, known as sokaya or corporate extortion, was a specialty. Yakuza operatives would purchase just enough stock to gain entry to a shareholder meeting, where they would threaten to air the company's dirty laundry unless they were paid a handsome fee to remain silent. For many of Japan's top corporations, these payoffs simply became a routine cost of doing business. It is tempting to see the Yakuza as a force separate from the formal financial system, but the reality is they were woven directly into it. Major banks frequently turned a blind eye to suspicious transactions, partly because the business was too lucrative to lose, and partly because refusing a Yakuza syndicate was, to put it mildly, a poor career move. In countless cases, banks loaned money directly to front companies controlled by these groups, knowingly financing the very speculative projects that were destabilizing the economy. When the money was flowing, nobody dared to ask where it came from. The profits were beyond staggering. By the mid-1980s, the Yamaguchi-gumi, the largest Yakuza syndicate, was rumored to have tens of thousands of members and control assets rivaling a multinational corporation. Their influence was no longer confined to Japan. It stretched to Hawaii, California, and across Southeast Asia, where they laundered their money and invested in foreign businesses. They were no longer just a domestic issue. They had become sophisticated international players, moving capital across borders with the same ease as any global investment bank. Politics, of course, was never far from the picture. Japan's ruling party maintained an iron grip on power for decades, a reign fueled by enormous fundraising networks. It was an open secret that Yakuza money helped grease the wheels of this political machine. In exchange for campaign financing and voter mobilization, the syndicates received protection, government contracts, and a political climate that turned a blind eye to their operations. As long as the economy continued its meteoric rise, few were willing to challenge the shadow empire propping up the state itself. But as we all know, no party lasts forever. In 1989, Japan's economic bubble burst with spectacular force. Real estate values plummeted, the stock market crashed, and trillions of dollars in paper wealth evaporated overnight. For the average person, it was the beginning of a lost decade of economic stagnation. For the Yakuza, it was both a crisis and a golden opportunity. While many of their investments were wiped out, Their role as society's enforcers of last resort became more valuable than ever. They became the brutal crisis managers for a broken economy, collecting debts and seizing property when no one else could. As Japan's regulators finally began to crack down on Yakuza influence in the 1990s, the syndicates proved just how adaptable they were. They shifted from the overt ownership of businesses to more subtle methods of influence, using complex corporate structures and front men. They diversified into new industries, from information technology to international finance. As the Japanese economy stagnated, they simply took their business model global, partnering with overseas criminal groups and finding new markets to exploit. They did not disappear, they just became harder to see. The government's crackdown, prompted by mounting scandals and pressure from foreign investors, did have an effect. Anti-gang laws were passed, making it illegal for companies to knowingly do business with syndicates. For the first time, membership in Yakuza organizations began to fall. But this decline was deceptive. Instead of operating from offices with logos on the door, they moved their operations into a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. They became less visible, but in many ways, more deeply embedded in the legitimate global economy than ever before. What makes the story of the Yakuza so profoundly important is not the spectacle of gangsters at shareholder meetings, but the universal truth it reveals. Crime and capitalism are not polar opposites. Very often, they are inseparable twins. When formal systems are slow, rigid, or full of red tape, criminal enterprises provide liquidity, speed, and a ruthless efficiency that can be dangerously appealing. That is why the Yakuza thrived, and why their modern-day equivalents continue to survive. The idea of a truly clean economy is, for the most part, a convenient fiction. And if you believe this is exclusively a Japanese problem, it is time to look closer to home. The methods perfected by the Yakuza, from money laundering and corporate blackmail to political financing, exist in every corner of the globe. In Italy, the mafia invests in construction. In Latin America, cartels wash their profits through real estate. In Western nations, the lines between aggressive corporate lobbying and legalized corruption can become impossibly blurry. The names change, but the mechanics remain the same. Power always flows to those who can master the combination of money and influence. So, what is the ultimate lesson here? It is that our financial systems are never as transparent as they claim to be. When you peel back the layers of corporate respectability, you often find hidden networks of power that play by an entirely different set of rules. The Yakuza may be Japan's most notorious example, but the principle is global. Whenever vast amounts of money and power accumulate, organized crime does not just feed on the system. It becomes a fundamental part of its operating system. History does not repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. The Yakuza's journey from street gamblers to corporate titans is not just Japan's story. It is the story of what happens when society tacitly accepts the merger of crime and capitalism as the cost of doing business. The shadows are always there, shaping our world in ways we rarely see. And the most dangerous empires are not always built with armies, but with balance sheets.